Operating a ranch of this magnitude wasn't without tremendous challenges, especially in the early days. The Waggoner Ranch had to navigate frontier conflicts, environmental extremes, and economic swings that could have spelled doom for a less tenacious outfit. One of the earliest trials came from the Comanche and other plains tribes who fiercely protected their lands. The Waggoner Range in the 1860s and 70s pressed into areas the Comanche once dominated. There are accounts of Indian raids threatening the Waggoner herds and camps, as happened to many Texas ranchers of that era. The Waggoners, like their neighbors, coped by organizing community defenses and establishing communication networks, hence the formation of the Cattle Raisers Association in 1877 to collectively address theft and raids. By the late 1870s, the Comanche had been forced onto reservations, easing that particular threat. But another challenge emerged: the end of the open range. When barbed wire fencing proliferated, range wars and fencing disputes broke out across Texas. Large outfits like Waggoner Ranch that fenced early were sometimes targeted by fence cutters, smaller farmers and stockmen angry at lost access. The Waggoners were involved in these tensions, but managed to hold their domain together. They also faced conflict over grazing land beyond Texas. In the early 1900s, Tom Waggoner and other Texas cattlemen negotiated leases in Oklahoma's Big Pasture, a huge tract of grassland in former Comanche territory, to extend their grazing. Tom Waggoner even struck a deal with the famous Comanche chief Quanah Parker to lease that range. For a time, Waggoner cattle peacefully grazed the Big Pasture, but political pressure mounted to terminate these leases, since that land was supposed to benefit the Indians, not out-of-state ranchers. The Waggoners and their allies fought to keep the lease. In a bit of theater, Quanah Parker invited President Theodore Roosevelt out to the Big Pasture for a well-publicized wolf hunt in 1905, hoping to win support. Roosevelt had a grand time hunting wolves on horseback with the Comanche chief. It was even said to be a highlight of his trip, but ultimately, it did not sway policy. The government closed the Big Pasture to Texas cattlemen, and Tom Waggoner lost that vast leased range. Losing the Big Pasture was a rare defeat for Waggoner Ranch, but Tom Waggoner took it in stride and refocused on lands within Texas. This episode illustrates the kind of resourcefulness and bold deals the Waggoners were willing to pursue, as well as their ability to adapt when plans went awry. Nature itself has tested the Waggoner Ranch time and again. North Texas is cattle country, but it is not without climatic hardships, from periodic droughts to bitter winter storms. During the 1880s and 1890s, severe blizzards and droughts struck the Great Plains, devastating many ranches. The Waggoners' widespread lands gave them an advantage. If one area was dry, another might have grass, so they could move cattle as needed. Moreover, after the turn of the century, Tom Waggoner invested in water infrastructure that proved critical. He partnered in the creation of Lake Kemp and Lake Diversion on the ranch in the early 1920s. Large reservoirs built on the Wichita River to supply water for both irrigation and nearby towns. These lakes meant the ranch had reliable surface water even when rainfall was scarce. In later years, thousands of earthen stock tanks, ponds, were also built across the property to catch rainwater, ensuring cattle never have to roam far for a drink. The commitment to water management helped the Waggoner Ranch survive the Dust Bowl drought of the 1930s and the severe drought of the 1950s that crippled many Texas ranches. While others sold out or went bankrupt, Waggoner Ranch kept its herds watered and intact, partly thanks to these foresighted water projects. The Great Depression of the 1930s was another major challenge. Cattle prices collapsed nationwide. The Waggoners, however, had a buffer. Their oil income was booming in those years, which helped offset losses in the cattle market. As noted earlier, Tom Waggoner died in 1934 in the depth of the Depression. The ranch he left behind was financially stable, due to its diversified businesses: cattle, oil, farming, horses, and thus it weathered the 1930s better than most. In summary, the Waggoner Ranch overcame frontier-era violence, changing laws and land policies, harsh weather, and economic busts through a combination of tenacity, innovation, and diversification. They were never afraid to try new ventures, be it oil drilling, horse racing, or new cattle breeds, to keep the ranch profitable. They fought for their interests, forming associations, lobbying politicians, even inviting presidents to go hunting, and weren't above changing course when needed. Each challenge met and conquered only added to the ranch's legendary status. While external challenges abounded, perhaps the fiercest battles were within the Waggoner family itself. As is often the case with great family fortunes, disagreements and rivalries emerged among the heirs of Dan and Tom Waggoner, threatening the very survival of the ranch as a single entity. The saga of Waggoner family disputes is a dramatic tale spanning the 20th century, full of courtroom showdowns and bitter feuding. But ultimately, it ended with the preservation of the ranch intact. It began with Tom Waggoner's children. Tom married Ella Halsell in 1877, and they had 5 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood: Electra Waggoner, Guy Waggoner, and E. Paul Waggoner. Tom was a devoted father and wanted to instill ranching sense in his kids. By the early 1900s, the Waggoner Ranch had ballooned to over 1 million acres, including leased land, across 6 counties. Managing such an empire was a lot for one man, so in 1909, Tom attempted a generous experiment. He divided the ranch into 4 parts. He kept the largest section, the Whiteface division on the east side, for himself, and gave each of his 3 children one of the other big divisions, roughly 85,000 acres apiece, as a Christmas gift. The divisions were even given distinct names: Zacahuesta, Four Corners, and Santa Rosa, and each child was meant to take charge of their section. Tom's hope was that his son and daughters would learn the ropes and continue the ranching tradition on their own portions of land. Unfortunately, that plan didn't work out as he envisioned. Managing a huge ranch takes aptitude and interest that his heirs, it turned out, lacked. According to Texas lore, the Waggoner children turned their acreage over to professionals, moved away, and pursued flamboyance. In other words, they enjoyed the fruits of wealth but not the hard work of ranching. Electra Waggoner became known for lavish spending, million-dollar shopping sprees. As one account put it, Guy Waggoner gained notoriety of a different sort, marrying a total of 8 times in his lifetime, which provides a hint of his personal turbulence. E. Paul Waggoner, to his credit, did involve himself in the horse operation, but he too had expensive tastes. Seeing his children's detachment and the potential for the ranch to splinter, Tom took decisive action. In 1923, he reunited all 4 divisions by creating the Tom Waggoner Estate, a single trust that placed all the land back under one umbrella. He effectively reversed the earlier gift and made himself the sole trustee in charge. The ranch became a Massachusetts business trust, a legal structure that would allow it to be managed as one entity even after Tom's death. His 3 children were named as beneficiaries and sat on the board, but Tom retained ironclad control as long as he lived. Tom Waggoner died in 1934, leaving the ranch in the trust for his heirs. After his passing, the estate was to be managed for the benefit of all his descendants, who were equal beneficiaries. At first, this arrangement held the ranch together through mid-century. Decades went by, and new generations were born. Electra Waggoner had married and became Electra Waggoner Wharton, having children of her own, including a daughter, Electra Waggoner Biggs, who, interestingly, became a nationally known sculptor. General Motors even named the Buick Electra automobile after her in 1959. E. Paul Waggoner also had children, one of whom was Helen Waggoner Biggs, later Helen Biggs Willingham. Guy Waggoner had 2 children, but in a twist, his side of the family sold their interests in the estate to their cousins in later years. By the late 1980s, the ownership of the Waggoner estate had consolidated into essentially two branches of the family: the descendants of Electra, notably her grandson A.B. Bucky Wharton Jr., and the descendants of E. Paul, including Helen Elaine Biggs and her husband Gene Willingham. These two camps, cousins to each other, did not see eye to eye. The cracks in the family unity erupted into a legal war in the early 1990s. The core issue: whether to sell the Waggoner Ranch or keep it. The estate had grown extremely valuable, on paper, over the years, but it was locked in a trust that made selling or dividing it difficult without unanimous agreement. Electra Waggoner Biggs, Electra's daughter, and her side apparently leaned towards selling the ranch and distributing the wealth, especially as they aged. On the other side, Bucky Wharton, Electra's grandson, and the E. Paul branch wanted to keep the ranch in the family and continue operations. By 1991, Electra Biggs moved to have the ranch sold and assets distributed, and Bucky opposed it. The dispute went to court, and it would drag on for over 2 decades in Texas courts. With an avalanche of suits and countersuits, it became one of the most protracted inheritance fights in Texas history. During these years, relations between the two family factions were icy. It's said that the respective family heads stopped speaking to each other entirely, communicating only via written memos, even though their offices were across the hall from each other in Vernon, Texas. Meanwhile, offers from wealthy outsiders kept pouring in. Oil magnates, media moguls, billionaires from across the country showed interest in buying the renowned Waggoner Ranch. But no sale could be agreed. 1, the heirs couldn't agree on a price or terms. And 2, as former Texas Governor Rick Perry once observed, there was no single motivated seller. Since the heirs were deadlocked, the result was a stalemate. The ranch couldn't be sold, but neither could it move forward easily with improvements or major changes due to the internecine fighting. By around 2013, the situation reached a breaking point. With the estate's feuding beneficiaries unable to resolve things, the court considered a drastic solution: breaking up the ranch and auctioning it off in pieces. A court-appointed receiver drew up plans for a potential auction that would split the 510,000-acre estate into parcels, sell them to the highest bidders, and even separately auction off assets like the mineral rights, equipment, cattle herd, horse herd, and the Waggoner brand name itself. This was the nightmare scenario for anyone who loved the ranch. Texas's greatest contiguous ranch dismembered and scattered to the winds. Longtime ranch brokers like Sam Middleton argued passionately against this outcome, believing that chopping up the ranch would destroy its historical identity and reduce its value. Fortunately, this dire breakup never came to pass. The pressure of the looming auction finally catalyzed a resolution. In 2014, the warring family members agreed to list the Waggoner Ranch for sale intact, to see if a buyer could be found who would meet their price. The asking price was eye-watering, $725 million, reflecting the ranch's vast land, 1,000-plus oil wells, cattle, horses, equipment, and even 41.67% of the mineral rights that would convey with the sale. It was essentially the largest ranch package ever put on the open market, and certainly one of the most expensive anywhere in the world. After some court-mandated steps, including a Texas Supreme Court ruling in 2015 that finally cleared the way to sell, a buyer emerged to make the deal of the century. In early 2016, the Waggoner Ranch was sold in its entirety to Stanley Kroenke, a billionaire businessman and rancher. Stan Kroenke is known for owning professional sports teams like the Los Angeles Rams, and also for being one of the largest landowners in America. With the Waggoner acquisition, which reportedly closed for around $725 million, Kroenke suddenly jumped from the 9th largest to the 5th largest private landowner in the United States. For Texas, this sale was historic. It marked the first time the Waggoner Ranch left the family since its 19th century founding. It was also a relief to many, because the buyer purchased the entire ranch intact, preserving it as one piece. The good news is that the massive ranch remained intact, even though the family fell apart, one writer aptly noted. Local communities around the ranch had been on edge about the sale. Hundreds of people in nearby towns depend on the Waggoner for their livelihoods, as cowboys, ranch hands, oil field workers, etc. Towns like Vernon and Electra, and even the city of Wichita Falls, which gets water from Waggoner's Lake Kemp, all have close ties to the ranch's operations. If a new owner slashed jobs or closed off access, it could hurt the whole region. Initially, there were fears, but in the years since 2016, the impact has been largely positive or neutral. Kroenke's organization pledged to continue running Waggoner as a working ranch and to respect its legacy. Indeed, day-to-day life on the ranch changed little for the roughly 100 employees who remained on staff. The cowboys still ride out to check cattle, the oil pumps still nod up and down, and the rhythm of ranch work carries on. One change that did come under new ownership was environmental. The Kroenke team launched a holistic wildlife and habitat management program on the ranch, aiming to improve ranges for quail and deer. They undertook extensive brush control on over 150,000 acres to revive native grasses and habitat diversity. This reflects Stan Kroenke's conservation-minded approach to his land holdings. Not every move was popular. Notably, the new owner ended a long-standing lake lease program that had allowed local families to maintain cabins on the shores of Lake Kemp and Lake Diversion, two lakes within the ranch. For decades, several hundred families had leased small lots by those lakes and built modest vacation homes there. In 2016, they were notified their leases would end, and they had 5 months to vacate. Kroenke's intent was to let the lake shores return to a more natural state to benefit the ecosystem. While this caused some local heartbreak, recreational access to Lake Kemp itself remains available to the public for fishing and boating for a fee via a park area. Thus, after decades of turmoil, the Waggoner Ranch's future was secured under a new steward who has both the resources and the inclination to keep it intact. The deal of the century ensured that this legendary ranch would continue as one of the great ranches of Texas, rather than being broken into fragments. It was the end of an era of family ownership, but the beginning of a new chapter where the Waggoner legacy lives on. Still strong, still vast, and still iconic,